The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, its ceiling lost in artificial clouds that glowed with soft blue light, and its walls lined with the banners of 347 member species, each one representing a civilization that had earned its place among the stars through strength, through wisdom, or through the simple fact of surviving long enough to matter. Ambassador Thelvari of the Sindari hegemony stood at the central podium, his forearms folded across his chest in a gesture of barely concealed contempt, and his silver scales catching the light as he turned to address the assembled delegates, who had gathered for what he considered a waste of their valuable time. Honored members of the council, he began, his voice carrying through the translation matrix that converted his words into 300 different languages simultaneously. I present to you the findings of Survey Team Keth 7 regarding the inhabitants of the third planet orbiting the yellow star designated Sol 449 in the outer spiral arm. A holographic display flickered to life above the podium, showing a blue and green world spinning slowly in the void, and Thelvari gestured toward it with one of his lower arms, while his upper arms remained crossed. The dominant species calls itself humanity and has existed in its current form for approximately 300,000 of their local years, which translates to roughly 150,000 standard cycles. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as delegates consulted their data tablets and exchanged glances with their aides. And High Arbiter Kesheth leaned forward on his throne of living crystal, his ancient eyes narrowing with mild interest. They are carbon-based bipeds, Thelvari continued, standing approximately 2 meters tall at maximum adult height, with no natural armor, no venom glands, no regenerative capabilities, and a lifespan averaging only 70 to 80 of their local years. A laugh echoed from somewhere in the upper galleries, and soon others joined in, the sound mixing with clicks and whistles and rumbles. A species that had nothing in common found unity in their amusement. Furthermore, Thelvari said, raising his voice to be heard over the noise, they remain confined to their single world of origin, having achieved only the most primitive forms of space travel, and their fastest vessels would require multiple generations to reach even the nearest neighboring star system. He paused to let this information sink in, and the laughter grew louder. They have developed nuclear fission and are experimenting with fusion, but their energy production remains laughably inefficient compared to even the most basic council standards. And they have shown no evidence of faster-than-light theoretical research or dimensional manipulation of any kind. High Arbiter Kesheth raised one withered hand, and the chamber fell silent immediately, for he had led the council for over 2,000 standard cycles, and his authority was absolute. What is your recommendation, Ambassador Thelvari? He asked, his voice like wind through dead leaves. Classification as a pre-emergent civilization. High Arbiter, to be monitored remotely, but otherwise ignored until such time as they develop FDL capability or destroy themselves, which based on their current trajectory of environmental degradation and nuclear proliferation seems the more likely outcome. More laughter, and Thelvari allowed himself a thin smile as he stepped back from the podium. Are there any objections to this classification? Kesheth asked, his tone suggesting that he expected none. I object. The chamber went quiet again, but this time with surprise rather than respect, and all eyes turned to the small figure rising from her seat in the lower galleries. Ambassador Urin of the Kelmoth Collective was unremarkable by galactic standards, her people being small and soft-bodied creatures who had achieved council membership through their unparalleled skills in communication and translation, rather than through military might or economic power. On what grounds? Thelvari demanded, his scales flushing with irritation. On the grounds that the survey team has measured the wrong things, Urin replied, her voice soft but steady as she made her way to the podium. And the delegates watched with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. "I have studied the electromagnetic broadcasts emanating from the human world," she continued. "And I have learned their languages, their histories, and their stories. And I believe we are making a grave error in dismissing them so quickly. What could their primitive broadcasts possibly tell us that our survey team missed?" Thelvari asked. "They tell us that humans are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." The laughter that followed was louder than before. And even High Arbiter Keshth allowed himself a dry chuckle. But Yurin stood her ground and waited for the noise to subside. "They have no natural weapons," she said. "So they created weapons, and they never stopped creating them. And they never stopped making them more deadly. And now they possess the ability to render their entire planet uninhabitable multiple times over, proving our point about their self-destructive nature." Thelvari interrupted. "They have short lives," Yurin continued as if he had not spoken. "So they learn to accomplish in decades what other species take centuries to achieve. And their science advances at a rate that would be considered reckless by any rational standard. Reckless indeed," someone called from the galleries. "They are confined to a single world," Yurin pressed on. "So they have spent their entire existence fighting each other for resources. And every generation has known war, and every generation has produced warriors. And they have never known peace for more than a few decades at a time." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had stopped laughing and were beginning to look uncomfortable. "We measure strength by natural armor, by venom, by size, by lifespan, by territory," she said. "But humans measure strength by one thing only, and that is the refusal to surrender, the absolute unwillingness to accept defeat. And I have seen in their broadcasts what they do to enemies who threaten their survival." "And what is that?" Kesheth asked, his voice carrying a hint of genuine curiosity. "Everything," Yurin replied. "They do everything, whatever it takes, no matter the cost. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many of them die in the process. And they do not stop until their enemy is utterly destroyed." The chamber was silent now, truly silent, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then Thelvari laughed again, and the tension broke, and the delegates joined him. And soon the great chamber was filled with the sounds of 300 species united in their certainty that the small ambassador from the Kelmoth Collective had let her imagination run away with her. "Your objection is noted," Kesheth said, "and overruled. And the humans are hereby classified as a pre-emergent civilization, to be monitored but not contacted until further notice." Yurin returned to her seat without another word, and the council moved on to other business. And within a few cycles, the humans were forgotten entirely. 3 standard years passed in peace, and then the Varax came. Amander Dreth, Khan of the Varax Dominion, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Hunger, and watched the blue planet growing larger on the main view screen with the satisfaction of a predator who was spotted easy prey. The Varax were not members of the Galactic Council, for the Council did not welcome species whose entire economy was built on the capture and sale of sentient beings. And so the Varax operated in the dark spaces between civilizations, raiding worlds that no one cared enough to protect. Drethkan had conquered 17 worlds in his career, and each conquest had been easier than the last. For most species surrendered when they saw the Varax armada descending from their skies, and those that did not surrender learned quickly that resistance only made their suffering worse. Analysis complete. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, her claws clicking against her console. "The planet has approximately 8 billion inhabitants, no orbital defenses, no energy shields, and no weapons capable of reaching our altitude. What about their military forces?" Drethkan asked, more out of habit than genuine concern. fragmented into nearly 200 separate political entities. Commander, each with their own military. And our projections suggest they will be too, busy fighting among themselves to mount any coordinated resistance. Drethkan's lipless mouth stretched into what passed for a smile among his kind, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and he leaned back in his command chair with a rumbling sound of contentment. "Begin landing operations," he ordered. "Standard pattern. Overwhelming force at all major population centers simultaneously. And I want processing ships in orbit within the standard cycle." The first wave of Varax landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere like a swarm of metal locusts, their hulls glowing red from the heat of entry. And they touched down in cities across the globe, in New York and Beijing and Moscow, and Delhi and 100 other places where humans had built their greatest monuments to their own civilization, the Varax. Soldiers emerged from their ships with weapons, raised and confidence in their hearts. For they had done this many times before, and they expected to see the same thing they always saw: panic, chaos, and surrender. What they saw instead was gunfire in New York. The Varax squad found itself surrounded by police officers who had abandoned their patrol routes and formed a defensive perimeter around the landing site. And when the squad leader ordered them to drop their weapons and submit, the officers opened fire without hesitation in Beijing. The People's Liberation Army had mobilized with impossible speed, and the Varax landing craft was destroyed by a missile strike before its doors had fully opened in Moscow. Civilians who had been on their way to work had armed themselves with whatever they could find: kitchen knives and baseball bats and broken bottles. And they threw themselves at the Varax soldiers with no regard for their own safety. And in Delhi, a grandmother who had lived through 3 wars in her long life walked up to a Varax commander and detonated the grenade she had been hiding under her shawl. Drethkan received the first reports with confusion, then with irritation, and then with something he had not felt in many years: concern. "Commander, we have lost contact with Landing Force 7. Commander, Landing Force 12 is requesting immediate extraction. Commander, Landing Force 3 has been completely destroyed." He stood from his command chair and walked to the view screen, staring down at the planet that was supposed to be helpless. And he watched as explosions blossomed across its surface like flowers made of fire. "What is happening down there?" he demanded. "Unknown, Commander, but it appears the humans are coordinating their response across political boundaries, and their communication networks have unified into a single command structure." Drethkan had never seen anything like it, for in his experience, fragmented species fought among themselves even as the Varax enslaved them, and their divisions made conquest simple. But these humans were setting aside centuries of hatred and mistrust in a matter of hours. "Send in the second wave," he ordered. "Double the forces. And this time, use orbital bombardment to soften the landing zones." The second wave fared no better than the first. The humans had moved their civilian populations underground, into subway tunnels and basements and bomb shelters that they had built during their many wars against each other. And the orbital strikes destroyed empty buildings, while the people who had lived in them survived to fight another day. And they did fight. They fought with weapons designed to kill each other, missiles that could cross continents and bombs that could level cities. And they turned these weapons against the Varax with a fury that bordered on madness. A nuclear submarine that had been lurking in the Pacific Ocean surfaced and launched its entire payload at the Varax fleet. And though most of the missiles were intercepted by point defense systems, 3 got through, and 3 Varax warships vanished in balls of atomic fire. Drethkan watched his ships die and felt something he had never felt before: fear. "Order all forces to fall back," he commanded. "We need to reassess our strategy. Commander, I am detecting a small vessel approaching our position. It appears to be one of our own shuttles that was captured during the ground assault. Destroy it. Commander, the shuttle is transmitting a message. Audio only. Drethkin hesitated. And that hesitation would be the last mistake he ever made. Play it, he said. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented Varax that it must have learned from captured translation devices. And the voice was calm, almost peaceful. As it delivered its message, "My name is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. And I want you to know something before you die, Commander. I want you to know that we knew this day would come. We always knew that something would come from the stars to try to take what is ours. And we have been waiting for you, and we have been preparing for you. And now we are going to show you what happens when you threaten humanity." The shuttle struck the endless hunger amidships, and Captain Chen detonated the nuclear device she had brought with her. And Commander Drethkan and his entire command staff ceased to exist in a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns. The remaining Varax ships, suddenly leaderless and facing an enemy that refused to behave like prey, attempted to retreat to FDL, but the humans had learned quickly, and captured Varax weapons were already being turned against their former owners. Of the 47 ships that had arrived in Earth's system expecting easy conquest, 3 managed to escape 3, and they carried with them a warning that would echo across the galaxy. The humans were not weak, and the humans were not afraid, and anyone who threatened them would pay a price beyond imagining on the surface of Earth. The survivors emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky where the burning wreckage of alien warships was falling like shooting stars. And they did not celebrate, for they knew that this was only the beginning. They had won the first battle, but they had also announced their presence to a universe that had ignored them for so long. And they knew that the universe would not ignore them any longer in the ruins of New York. A general whose name would be remembered for centuries turned to his staff and spoke the words that would become humanity's motto in the years to come. "Find out where they came from," he said. "And then find out who else is out there, because we are never going to be caught off guard again." The stars had tried to devour Earth, and Earth had bitten back. And now humanity was ready to take its first steps into a galaxy that had underestimated them for the last time. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began with a silence so complete that delegates could hear the hum of the climate control systems that kept the great chamber at a temperature comfortable for 300 different species. High Arbiter Kesh sat upon his throne of living crystal and read the report for the 3rd time, as if reading it again might somehow change the words that glowed on the screen before him. But the words remained the same, no matter how many times he looked at them. The Varax raiding fleet had been destroyed, not defeated, not repelled, not driven back, but destroyed. And the 3 ships that had escaped had done so only because the humans had run out of weapons to throw at them. "This cannot be accurate," Ambassador Thilvari said, his silver scales pale with shock. The Varax have terrorized the outer systems for generations. Their fleet was one of the most powerful forces operating outside Council space. And you expect us to believe that a pre-emergent civilization annihilated them in less than a standard month? The report comes from Varax survivors, Ambassador, Kesheth replied. And while the Varax are many things, they are not known for exaggerating their own defeats. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted over one another, some demanding immediate action against the humans, others calling for calm, and still others simply expressing their disbelief in whatever manner their species found most appropriate. Ambassador Urine of the Kelmoth Collective sat in her usual seat in the lower galleries and watched the pandemonium with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been sorrow. For with the Kelmoth, it was often difficult to tell. "Order," Kesheth commanded, and his voice carried the weight of 2,000 years of authority. and the chamber fell silent once more. We must approach this situation with logic, not emotion. And we must gather more information before we make any decisions. What more information do we need? Thalvari demanded. A primitive species has demonstrated capabilities far beyond what our surveys predicted. And that makes them a potential threat to the stability of the entire galaxy. Or a potential ally, Yurin said quietly. But her voice carried in the sudden stillness. You would ally with these creatures? Thalvari asked. You would welcome them into the council after they slaughtered thousands of Varax soldiers? The Varax attacked them first, Yurin pointed out. And the humans defended themselves, which is exactly what any species would do. And exactly what any species has the right to do. The humans did not merely defend themselves. Another delegate interjected. They captured Varax technology and reverse-engineered it within days. They turned enemy weapons against enemy ships. And they did all of this while fighting a war on multiple fronts across their entire planet, which proves my point, Thalvari said. They are too dangerous to be left alone and too unpredictable to be trusted. And we must take action before they develop true FTL capability and begin expanding beyond their system. The debate continued for hours, with delegates arguing in circles and accomplishing nothing. Until finally, Kasheth raised his hand for silence. We will send a diplomatic mission, he declared. A small fleet, well-armed but clearly non-aggressive. And we will make contact with the humans and assess their intentions directly. And until we have more information, we will take no other action. The motion passed, though not unanimously. And within a cycle, a diplomatic convoy was assembled and dispatched to the Sol system, carrying representatives from 12 council species and enough firepower to defend against any reasonable threat. Ambassador Yurin was among them, for she had been appointed as the primary translator and cultural liaison. And she spent the long journey studying everything the council had ever recorded about humanity, preparing herself for whatever they might find. What they found was silence. The convoy emerged from FDL at the edge of the Sol system and immediately began broadcasting standard diplomatic greetings on all frequencies. But there was no response, and the only sounds that filled the communication channels were the empty hiss of cosmic radiation. Scan the system, the convoy commander ordered. Find out where they are. The scans revealed a planet that should have been teeming with electromagnetic signals, but was instead eerily quiet. An orbital space that should have been cluttered with primitive satellites was instead filled with debris. Wreckage that the sensors identified as the remains of both Varax and human vessels. Perhaps they destroyed each other, someone suggested. Perhaps the Varax did more damage than we realized before they were defeated. No, Yurin said. Look at the debris patterns. The wreckage is being cleared. Someone is collecting it. Collecting it for what purpose? Before anyone could answer, the sensors screamed a warning that made every delegate's blood run cold. Or whatever fluid served the same purpose in their particular biology. Ships were emerging from behind the largest gas giant in the system. And they were emerging in numbers that should have been impossible. How many? The commander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sensors are still counting, the tactical officer replied. Preliminary estimate is 300 vessels and climbing. That cannot be correct. The humans had no spacefaring capability. Their most advanced vessel was a primitive shuttle that could barely reach their own moon. Commander, the vessels appear to be constructed from a combination of human and Varax technology. They have hybridized captured enemy ships with their own designs. And they have been building continuously since the invasion ended. Yurin looked at the view screen and felt something she had never expected to feel. Hope the humans had not been cowering in the aftermath of the attack. And they had not been rebuilding their shattered civilization. And they had not been mourning their dead, or rather they had been doing all of these things. But they had also been doing something else. They had been preparing for the possibility that the Vorax were not the only threat in the galaxy, preparing for the possibility that others might come, preparing to ensure that no one would ever catch them helpless again. "Commander," the communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet, audio and video. They want to talk." "Put it through." The view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. A woman with dark hair and tired eyes and a uniform that bore insignia the Council's database could not identify. And when she spoke, her voice was calm and measured and carried no trace of fear. "This is Admiral Chen Wei-Lin of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she said. "We have been expecting you, Council representatives, and we have a great deal to discuss." Yurin noticed that the Admiral's surname was the same as the captain who had sacrificed herself to destroy the Vorax command ship. And she wondered if there was a connection, and she suspected that there was. And she suspected that the humans had given this woman command of their fleet for a reason. "We request a formal audience with the Galactic Council," the Admiral continued, "and we will accept nothing less than a seat at your table, because we have learned a hard lesson about what happens to species that are ignored by those with power." The commander looked at his delegates, and the delegates looked at each other, and no one knew what to say. For this was not how first contact was supposed to go. And this was not how primitive species were supposed to behave. "You have our attention, Admiral Chun," Yurin said, stepping forward before anyone could stop her. "And we are listening." The Admiral's eyes found Yurin through the view screen, and for a moment something that might have been recognition passed across her face. "You are the one who tried to warn them," she said. "We intercepted your broadcasts, Ambassador, and we know that you spoke for us when no one else would." Yurin inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Then you understand," the Admiral continued, "that we are not asking for permission. We are not requesting membership, and we are not begging for protection. We are offering you a choice, and you would be wise to choose carefully." The transmission ended, and the human fleet hung in space like a storm waiting to break. And the delegates of the Galactic Council realized for the first time that the universe they had known for millennia was about to change forever. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stepped off the shuttle and onto the deck of the Council flagship with her head held high and her shoulders squared. And she was followed by 6 members of her personal guard, each of them wearing armor that combined human craftsmanship with salvaged Vorax technology in ways that made the Council's engineers deeply uncomfortable. She was not a tall woman by human standards, and she was certainly not imposing by galactic standards, where some species stood 3 meters high, and others were covered in natural armor that could deflect plasma fire. But there was something in the way she carried herself that made even the largest delegates step back as she passed Ambassador Yurin, met her at the airlock, and escorted her through the corridors of the diplomatic vessel. And as they walked, the two of them spoke quietly in a human language that Yurin had learned from intercepted broadcasts years before. "You honor me with your presence, Ambassador," Chen said. "My aunt spoke of you before she died." "Your aunt was Captain Sarah Chen," Yurin said. "And it was not a question. She was. And she would have been pleased to know that at least one member of your council understood what we were before the rest of the galaxy did." "I did not understand," Yurin admitted. "I merely suspected, and I hoped that I was wrong, because a species capable of what I suspected would change everything." "And were you wrong?" Yurin looked at the Admiral, at the steel in her eyes and the grief that lay beneath it. And she shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I was not wrong." The conference chamber had been prepared for the meeting, with seats arranged in a circle so that no species would appear to hold a position of dominance. But Admiral Chun ignored the carefully arranged furniture and walked directly to the center of the room, where she stood and waited for the delegates to settle into their places around her. High Arbiter Kesheth had not made the journey himself, for he was old and the travel would have been difficult. But his image floated in a holographic projection that made him appear to be seated among the other delegates, and his eyes followed Chun with an intensity that belied his advanced years. "Admiral Chun," he began, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome you and your species to the community of starfaring civilizations. And I express our sincere regret that your first contact with other intelligent life was so violent." "Save your regrets," Chun replied. "We have no use for them, and we have no interest in your sympathy. And we did not come here to exchange pleasantries." A murmur of displeasure rippled through the assembled delegates, for no one spoke to the High Arbiter in such a manner. But Kesheth raised his hand for silence. "Then tell us why you have come," he said. "I have come to deliver humanity's terms," Chun said, "and to give you the opportunity to accept them peacefully, because we would prefer peace. But we are prepared for the alternative." Ambassador Thelvari rose from his seat, his scales flushing with anger. "You dare to speak of terms?" he demanded. "You are a primitive species that has barely begun to explore your own solar system. And you presume to dictate conditions to civilizations that were old when your ancestors were still living in caves?" Chun turned to face him, and her expression did not change. "We are a species that destroyed a Varak's raiding fleet in 27 days, she said. "And we are a species that built 300 warships from wreckage and willpower in 3 years. And we are a species that has spent its entire existence fighting for survival against enemies that outnumbered us and outmatched us and should have destroyed us 1,000 times over." She looked around the chamber, meeting each delegate's eyes in turn. "You measure our history in centuries and find it wanting," she continued. "But you do not understand what those centuries contain. You do not understand that we have fought wars that killed millions of our own kind. And we survived. And we do not understand that we have faced plagues that should have ended us. And we survived. And you do not understand that every generation of humanity has known struggle and suffering and death. And every generation has survived." The chamber was silent now, and even Thelvari had nothing to say. "We are not strong because we have natural armor or venomous fangs or centuries of life," Chun said. "We are strong because we have learned to be strong. Because strength was the only thing that kept us alive, and we have become very, very good at surviving." High Arbiter Kesheth leaned forward in his holographic projection. "What are your terms, Admiral?" he asked. "Full membership in the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Complete access to faster-than-light technology and the knowledge necessary to build our own vessels. A permanent seat on every committee that makes decisions affecting our species. And recognition of Earth and its solar system as sovereign human territory. Those terms are unprecedented," Kesheth said. "New member species are typically granted provisional status for a minimum of 100 cycles before being considered for full membership. Then consider this an exception. And if we refuse?" Chun smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Then we will build our own FTL drives from captured Varak's technology. And it will take us longer, perhaps decades instead of years. But we will succeed, and when we do, we will expand into the galaxy without your permission. And we will remember that you had the chance to welcome us as partners and chose instead to treat us as children." "That sounds very much like a threat." "Admiral," Thelvari said. "It is not a threat," Chun replied. "It is a prediction based on extensive analysis of human history and human nature. And if you doubt my words, I invite you to review our historical records, which we will provide freely, and you will see that humanity has never, not once in all of our existence, accepted subjugation. And you will see that we have toppled every empire that tried to rule us. And you will see that we have outlasted every enemy that tried to destroy us." She paused to let her words sink in. "We are offering you friendship," she said, "and we are offering you an alliance. And we are offering you the one thing that no other species in your long history has ever been willing to provide. A partner who will stand beside you against any threat, no matter how powerful, no matter how dangerous. Because that is what humanity does. We stand and we fight and we do not surrender." Ambassador Yurin rose from her seat. "High Arbiter," she said, "I believe the Admiral's terms are reasonable. And I believe that humanity would be a valuable addition to the Council. And I move that we accept their application for full membership without the standard probationary period." "You cannot be serious," Thelvari protested. "I am entirely serious," Yurin replied. "And I remind my colleagues that I warned you about this species 3 years ago. And you dismissed my concerns, and now you have seen what happens when humanity is threatened. And I ask you to imagine what might happen if humanity were threatened by something that we ourselves cannot defeat." The chamber fell silent again as the delegates considered her words. There are powers in this galaxy that the Council has never been able to challenge. Yurin continued, "There are threats that we have simply learned to avoid. And there are enemies that we have been too afraid to confront. But perhaps, with humanity beside us, we might finally have the strength to face them." She turned to face Chen. "That is what you are truly offering, is it not, Admiral?" she asked. "Not just an alliance, but a weapon. A species that does not know how to give up, that does not understand the concept of acceptable losses, that will fight until the very last individual falls." Chen met her gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what we are offering, because we have learned that the universe is dangerous. And we have learned that the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than anything that threatens you." High Arbiter Kesheth looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates, at species that had known peace for millennia and had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. And he made his decision. "The Council will vote," he announced. "And may the gods of all our species guide us toward wisdom." The vote was not unanimous, for Ambassador Thelvari and several others refused to support what they called a surrender to intimidation. But the majority carried, and humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council by a margin of 212 to 135. Admiral Chen accepted the result with a simple nod, as if she had expected nothing else, and within a cycle the first human ambassadors were on their way to Council space, while the first Council engineers were on their way to Earth, carrying with them the secrets of faster-than-light travel that humanity had demanded. What happened next would be studied by historians for millennia. The Council engineers expected the technology transfer to take years, for FTL theory was complex and the practical applications required precise understanding of physics that most species took generations to master. But the humans absorbed the knowledge with a speed that bordered on the supernatural within 6 months. The first human-built FTL drive was being tested in orbit around Jupiter within a year. Earth had commissioned 12 new warships capable of crossing the galaxy within 2 years. Humanity had established colonies on 3 different worlds, each one chosen for strategic value as much as habitability. The Council watched with a mixture of awe and growing unease as the species they had dismissed as blitzdays, primitive, began reshaping the balance of power in their corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Yurin remained humanity's primary liaison to the Council, and she spent more time among humans than among her own people, learning their customs and their stories and their seemingly endless capacity for both creation and destruction. She watched as human scientists cracked problems that had baffled Council researchers for centuries, approaching each challenge with a reckless creativity that often violated what the Council considered fundamental laws of physics. She watched as human diplomats forged alliances with species that the Council had overlooked or abandoned, the small and the weak and the forgotten. building a network of relationships that owed nothing to the traditional power structures of galactic civilization. And she watched as human soldiers, working alongside those same allied species, began hunting the remaining Vorax slavers with a methodical, relentless precision that left no room for mercy or negotiation. The Vorax had scattered after their defeated Earth, breaking into smaller groups that continued their raiding operations in the lawless regions between Council territories. And for generations, the Council had accepted this as an unfortunate reality. A problem too costly to solve. Humanity did not accept it. The hunt lasted 7 years. And when it was over, the Vorax Dominion had ceased to exist as a coherent entity. Its leadership dead, its fleet destroyed, and its surviving members scattered across the galaxy as refugees rather than conquerors. High Arbiter Kesheth received the final report in his private chambers, and he read it 3 times before setting it aside and staring out the window at the stars that had seemed so familiar just a decade ago. Ambassador Uran is here. High Arbiter, his aide announced. Send her in. Uran entered and took her customary seat across from the ancient leader. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. You have completed your assessment of humanity, Kesheth said finally. I would like to hear your conclusions. Uran reached into her bag and produced a data tablet. But she did not hand it over immediately. My conclusions are not comfortable ones. High Arbiter, she warned. I did not expect them to be. She activated the tablet and began to speak, and her voice carried the weight of years spent walking among Abaz, species that was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The initial survey team classified humans as weak because they measured the wrong things, she began. They saw short lifespans and assumed fragility. But they did not understand that creatures who know they will die learn to fight as though every moment matters. They saw a species confined to a single world and assumed limitation. But they did not see a species that had spent millennia competing against itself, sharpening every instinct for survival against the most dangerous enemy imaginable. Other humans. Kesheth nodded slowly. We thought they were weak because they had no natural weapons. Uran continued. But we did not understand that this forced them to create weapons. And they never stopped creating them, and each weapon was more terrible than the last, until they possessed the power to crack their own world in half. And yet they did not use that power because they had also learned restraint. A restraint born from the knowledge of what they were capable of. A dangerous combination. Kesheth observed. Extremely dangerous, Uran agreed. And it is that danger that makes them valuable. Because there are threats in this galaxy that we have never been able to face. Powers that we have simply learned to avoid, and the humans do not avoid anything. They do not understand the concept of an enemy too powerful to challenge. She set the tablet down on the desk between them. My assessment is this. Humanity is the most dangerous species the Council has ever encountered, and also the most valuable ally we could ever hope to have. And the key to our survival lies in ensuring that they remain our allies, because if they ever become our enemies, we will not survive the experience. Kesheth picked up the tablet and scrolled through the data, the charts and graphs and projections that supported Uran's conclusions. And when he finished, he set it down again and let out a long, slow breath. You warned us, he said, 3 years before the Vorax invasion. You stood before the Council and told us that we were making a mistake. And we did not listen. No, Uran agreed. You did not. Why did you see what the rest of us missed? Uran was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Because I listened to their stories, she said finally. Not their broadcasts or their scientific papers or their political speeches, but their stories, the tales they told their children, the myths and legends that shaped their understanding of themselves. And in those stories I found a pattern that no other species in the galaxy shares. What pattern? Triumph through adversity, Uran said. Every human story, from the most ancient myths to the most modern entertainments, follows the same arc. A hero faces an impossible challenge, suffers terrible setbacks, and ultimately prevails through determination and sacrifice and the absolute refusal to surrender. And this is not just their fiction, High Arbiter. This is their fundamental belief about reality. They truly believe that any obstacle can be overcome if you are willing to pay the price. She leaned forward in her seat. Most species tell stories about accepting fate, about finding peace with the natural order, about knowing when to yield. But humans tell stories about defying fate, about challenging the natural order, about never yielding. And they have told these stories for so long that the stories have become true. They have shaped themselves into the heroes of their own myths. Kasheth was silent for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What have we done?" he asked. "By ignoring them, by allowing the Varax to attack them, by forcing them to reveal their true nature to the galaxy, what have we set in motion?" Uran stood and walked to the window, looking out at the same stars that Kasheth had been contemplating when she arrived. "I do not know," she admitted. "But I believe that the galaxy will never be the same. And I believe that the changes are only beginning. And I believe that in the end, when historians look back on this era, they will mark the human admission to the Council as the moment when everything changed." She turned back to face him. "The Council thought humans were weak," she said. "And then the fleet arrived, and now the universe knows better. And now the universe must decide what to do with a species that will not stop, will not yield, and will not be denied." High Arbiter Kasheth looked at the report one final time, at the projections that showed human population growth and territorial expansion and technological development accelerating faster than any species in recorded history. And he felt something he had not felt in 2,000 years of leadership. It was fear, but underneath the fear, buried deep in a part of his mind that he had almost forgotten existed, there was something else. It was hope, because Uran was right. There were threats in the galaxy that the Council could not face. Powers that had lurked in the dark for millennia, waiting for their moment, and perhaps, just perhaps, the humans were the answer to prayers that no one had dared to speak aloud. The old Arbiter set down the report and turned to face the window. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the human fleet continued to grow. A storm waiting to break upon whatever enemy dared to threaten the galaxy that had finally, reluctantly and with great trepidation, become their home.